Okay. Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you to those of you tuning in person as well as online tonight. Thank you for joining us. So a little bit about our press, if this is your first time joining us. Jack Pine Press is based here in Saskatoon, where we're tuning in from. We're founded in 2002. And for almost 20 years, we've helped poets and artists make weird, beautiful, handmade poetry chapbooks. We encourage collaboration and the sharing and learning of new skills, the intersection of artistic disciplines, and the exploration of what a book is permitted to be. Jack Pine Press receives support to do what we do from Sask Arts, and we'd like to extend our sincerest thanks to them tonight for making it possible for us to bring you this wonderful poetry and all of these beautiful books, including the one we're looking at tonight, Intimacies. So I will introduce myself as well. I'm Delane Just, the current executive director for Jack Pine Press. You can use she or they pronouns for me. And I also have Logan McManus, she, her, with me as well on tech. So those of you online, you'll be primarily interacting with Logan there, but we will be able to see your chat responses and questions from our end as well. Logan is a multimedia artist and digital UI and UX designer based in Treaty 6 territory with a passion for writing and design and a diverse skill set in media production. And Logan strives to assist artists with the tools and technology they need to succeed in their work. Okay, so then before we go any further, we'd like to also do a land acknowledgement. We're coming all here together from many different places with those of you in our online virtual room as well. But Jack Pine Press and where we're located right now is on Treaty 6 territory, the unceded territories of the Nehiawak and Anishinaabe, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and Dene nations, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. So throughout the whole reading and event, we welcome audience engagement via online, where those of you on the screen are, as well as in person as well. And we invite audience questions too. We'll have a Q&A interview style section towards the end of the event after Michelle's reading. And you can, if you're tuning in from online, you can add the questions in the Q&A box or directly in the chat, and we'll be able to find them from there. Okay. For the online audience, you can also use live text captions available through Zoom that you can turn on at the bottom of your screen using the CC icon. And then just finally another thing, welcome to all of you, our online as well as in-person audience. We're excited to be back in person for the first time in several years due to the pandemic. So as well, you'll be able to find the book tonight for purchase online, as well as those of you in person. We can do purchases at the end of the event as well. And that'll be on our website. Logan will add that to the chat there for all of you to find it online. And okay, so that kind of takes care of all the preamble stuff. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our author of the night, Michelle Poirier Brown. Michelle Poirier Brown is an internationally published poet and performer living on unceded Syilx territory in Vernon, BC. She is Cree and a citizen of the Métis Nation. Her debut book of poems, You Might Be Sorry You Read This, was published in 2022 by the University of Alberta Press. Her poem, Wake, won Prism International's Earl Burney Prize in 2019. The song cycle, The Length of a Day, with Jeffrey Ryan, composer, premiered in 2021. Michelle's work has appeared in ARC, CV2, the Greensboro Review, Grain, Emir's Journal, Vallum, and several anthologies. As a feminist activist, Michelle won a landmark human rights case establishing reasonable accommodation in the workplace for breastfeeding women. Retired from careers as a speechwriter, conflict analysis, and federal treaty negotiator, she now writes full-time and has taken up bird watching. All right, so I'll bring Michelle to the stage.
Good evening. I cannot begin without first thanking Jack Pine Press. To be recognized as a poet and artist by Jack Pine Press is an ambition that many poets and artists in Western Canada, possibly in all of Canada, aspire to, and it is a huge honor to have been published by this press. To wow, welcome to those of you who are joining me here in Saskatoon, and to wow, welcome as well to all the folks who have joined us online. It's very exciting. And for those of you who are online, I just want to tell you that the press has arranged for this beautiful, huge screen to be down in front of us. So if you turn your cameras off, I'll actually be able to see you, so you can wave. If I notice, I might even wave back. Oh, hi, you guys. I'm so happy you're here. A little bit about the book before I read from it. Intimacies is a chapbook of both poems and photographs. And the poems are, well, the book's called Intimacies, and the poems are about relationships, marriage relationships, friendships, lovers, friendships with sexual tensions, the relationship as well with the self. These poems span about 40 years. So there's a lot of different relationships represented in these poems. The poems are not in chronological order, so you can't make any assumptions about any poem and any one person that they might be. The photos, on the other hand, were all taken during a period of time when I was recovering from a medically induced severe major depression, when sometimes the most important feature of my day was to see the sun coming through a window. And a form that I particularly like in poetry is the diptych, which is a poem that has two poems in it that are joined by a theme or a hinge. And you can think of this collection as having that nature, that there are two distinct collections with their own character, but joined by a hinge. I'm going to begin with a poem that also needs a bit of an introduction. It's one of the oldest poems in the book, written about 40 years ago when I was living in Regina. And for those of you that were on the prairies at that time, you might remember when Mount St. Helens erupted in the spring of 1980. We all lived with the ash from that throughout the summer. And late in the summer, in the early fall, I was working as a freelance writer, and I had a contract with Gulf Canada Products Company to profile some of their bulk fuel centers, bulk fuel sellers who were their stars in terms of the market expansion that they were trying to do in the agricultural field in the prairies at that time. So I spent 5 weeks on the road driving around to farm sites and bulk fuel sites. And the sunsets at that time, because of all this dust in the air, were just amazing. I would often pull off to the side of the road and the sunset was 360 degrees around and went right up to the top of the sky. And one night, I was driving quite late, and I noticed something out the window, and it was the northern lights. I pulled over and got out of the car, and the lights were like a huge white iceberg in the center of the sky with streaks of green and purple and blue and white coming down all the way to the horizon, all the way around me. While the poem references that experience, what it's really about is how when two people are in close relationship, living together, you can still have experiences that seem to draw you apart. And sometimes you look across the table and you say, who is this person? But there are also moments where you can work and come back into that close emotional proximity. This poem is in two voices, and it's really two poems that dovetail together and end in a single line. I'm going to perform both voices. I'm hoping to do it in a way that you can distinguish the two poems and follow. That's about all you need to know, except that the poem is called Rhythm. Listen, I saw light. My heart, chiseled across the sky, is tired. It struck all corners. My last good thought of our earth was yesterday at 3. Enclosed our sky with power. How clean you look. And held me rapt. There's more life in your eyes. I felt my solitude than I've ever had. My own emptiness greater than me. You're greater than me. Can't capture it. It's in your face. No words for wonder. I wonder, can you feel what it's like inside your head? What I've seen, what I see, what you see, what you are, where you've been, what you've done. Do you see what you mean? What you mean to me? Interruption. I bend up my knees to lift my center as a flower lifts to the sun a child's face to her mother and rock. Slide over you, pressed into me. Then you quiet me, bringing me from the wash of swimming underwater next to dolphins, back to my own bed. Husbandry. On his corner of the dining room table, a grocery flyer spread wide. Fashion boots, zippers up the back, their sleek noses taut from the discipline of cedar shoe trees. It is spring. One by one, he opens the polished pots, sniffs for freshness, discards the spent ones. He's dressed for the task, misshapen black t-shirt and underpants. He rips a strip of rag, dabs the black cream over the toes, up the ankles, rubs, then buffs them with a short black brush. They are ready now to be boxed, then slid beneath her dresser. This small bit of husbandry complete. Untitled. You wouldn't believe me if I said I loved you when I first saw you below me on the stair. Ever since, I have been learning how not to. Love poem. Tobias stalks the shadows. What he hunts here, he will take home. I grieve for songbirds, but do not love him less. I pull your hand around my belly, unfold my willingness against your guardian warmth. If I touch you here, will your heart slow? There are times as poets when we work from prompts, and this is a poem that arose out of prompts. In this case, it was a pile of single lines of poetry, and the two that I picked at random were I Want to Sleep in You, which is from the poem An Iron Hedgehog in Talking to My Body by Anna Swer. And the other line is My Bright Ambiguous Grief from the poem The Way in Auguries by Clea Roberts. And the poem is called I Want to Sleep in You. I want to sleep in you, find my way to the haven your rib cage shelters, lie in the soft pillow of your left lung, the roar and swoosh of your heart, reassuring and familiar as the steel mill, a block beyond my childhood yard. And in that soft chamber, lay aside my bright, ambiguous grief, its teeth sunk in my throat, its breath breathing me. I'm going to read two more. This poem is the poem that I consider the hinge poem between the two collections. It has a head note that says, after watching Patrick Lane mime transporting a spider. And it's called Small Graces. The great man raised his great hands and swooped them one under the other, manual illustration of the act to catch, then catch again, a spider scooped from the ceiling, now on its way to the garden. A small rescue, he calls it, a grace. My heart falls in with the spider. From her point of view, they are neither small nor graceful, these rescues. All the same, what are the things that save me? A desk by a window, soft-boiled eggs, reassurance it's okay I called, a well-ordered kitchen, the taste of borage flowers in July, superior bathroom hardware, These are the things that sustain me as I swing through the treacherous air, one hand of God after the other. And I'm going to end with this poem. There was a time when I had a family in Victoria and a job in Vancouver, and I commuted between two places. And even after I went into medical retirement and my partner and I settled in Victoria, we still kept a small condo in Vancouver where I would spend time. This poem is about the distance that can happen between friends. It's called The Affluence I Want to Mean Nothing. I sleep in a box of air above red maples now in leaf, a glimpse of sea beyond the towers. We value our proximity to cheap sushi, street life in the West End, neon lights, boutique shoes. The urban cottage, our pied-à-terre. I want nothing to divide us, not the miles beyond the mountains, not the blind of silence. I want to feel your dust aloft above the grain fields, blown against my face. Thank you very much.
Can you still hear me there online? We're going to now shift into our Q&A section of the evening. So those of you online can put your questions in the chat. And those of you in person, if you have any questions, then I will invite you to the mic in the center here. So first, we'll just get set up in our new seats for this section. So just one moment for those of you online. Oh yeah, the camera moved over. Oh, wonderful. There we are. Beautiful. Okay. So we are now going to start with the Q&A. So those of you in the chat, if you have those, is there a way for me to see the questions as they come up from here? Oh, yeah. So actually, we will, if you have questions, we'll ask you to unmute and say them out loud. There's not really a great way for me to see them from here. So there we go. Oh, perfect. There they are. Now we can see the questions. Perfect. So why don't we first start with one of our questions? My question for Michelle would be, what was your favorite design element for the book? And then we'll go into a few audience and back and forth.
Favorite design element. Well, one of the best parts of doing the design was to get to work with Patrice Snopkowski from Out West Design. I've known Patrice for over 25 years. Not that we see each other a lot, but I've known of her for that long. And I knew when I wanted to do this book, I really wanted to see what she would do with it, and to trust her, particularly with the photographs.
Mhm.
And it was nice to be able to trust her in terms of the choice of the stock, because the paper is not pure white, and so the
Mhm.
photos change a bit on that stock. Patrice herself is a photographer, and that's a move that I wouldn't have had the courage to make, but because she's a photographer, it was a move that I felt I could really trust. And then when the book arrived and I was handling it, my favorite thing about the book is the way the paper feels, because it
Yes.
feels like bed sheets.
It really does. Yeah, it's
It's
quite
soft and
soft.
smooth, and it's just, yeah, like really expensive bed sheets.
Yeah, and you can't quite like, just from the pictures that Logan has going, like you can't quite see how it feels. You have to touch it yourself to kind of get more of an idea. Those, I think, yeah, they're on screen for those of you online. We have them in the back here. Yeah, with those pictures then too. So while you were creating this chapbook, did you have the pictures before or after? Like, which order did you kind of put everything together? What were your thoughts in linking together the pictures with the poems?
Well, as I say, the poems and the photographs are for me two quite distinct
Yeah.
collections.
Mhm.
And to me, they speak to each other because the moments in the poems
Mhm.
are not moments that I would, without the poems, I wouldn't find it very easy to talk to a complete stranger about
Mhm.
my behavior in bed or other places. But similarly, the photographs, having severe major depression
Mhm.
was a very private experience,
Mhm.
especially in the early years. And it took years to work my
Yeah.
way out of that. Um, I didn't like to leave the house much. I stopped driving because, well, the day I drove into a rock was the day that I decided, no, this is not working. I
Mhm.
need to change this. So that private personal relationship between me and the little house that I lived in
Yeah.
had the same feel to me as some of those private moments between me and others. And
Yeah.
so that's the link
100%.
for them. So they weren't ekphrastic in that, the poem where we see something and we write in response
Right. Yeah.
to it. It wasn't an ekphrastic experience. It was more that when I saw the collection come together,
Yeah.
and then I had this collection of photographs, and I wanted to bring them together.
And like how beautiful it then became all together too, with the title of course being so fitting with Intimacies. And you really do get a feel, like as some of you seeing the photos on the screen, and if you flip through the book or see them on line as well, they do have this quality to them where it feels very intimate, and it feels very like you're seeing not just pictures of moments within a home, but also through the eyes of someone at the same time. So yeah, it's very, very cool. So why don't we then take our question from the online audience. From Rilla, we have, in the diptych poem, I really started to think about the depression experience and how there's this shadow voice that tries to dull every happy memory, and the form really matched that. Is that a sort of layered experience, a theme of the collection? And can you talk about the complexities of exploring that experience? Thank you, Rilla.
Yeah. Let me just think for a moment. It's a shadow voice that tries to dull.
Kind of a layered question.
Yeah, it is. And I think how I want to respond is that intimate moments have that layering, have a layering to them. When I was in the depths of the depression, I was trying to, in the early years, I was trying to write, and it was more of that it's not like I had this active life that was being dulled by the depression. It was that I had this little germ of life still inside me that was very much wanting to emerge, but it was kind of erratic and ill-formed, and things started to come, but I didn't know which direction they were going to. And as the I slowly weaned myself off the medication that was causing the problem and started to recover neurally from the damage that had been done, it felt like that little spark was becoming a stronger flow. And at the time, pardon the language that I'm about to use, but I said that it felt like I was standing on the end of a dock pissing into a river, because there was something coming through me, but I wasn't able to give it shape or form or understand it. And then slowly, I mean, that the whole thing, I left my job in May of 2010. So it's been 12 years of recovery, and slowly things started to move into containers, including the book that came out this spring, and then this book, and I'm working on other things as well. So it's nice to see things move into containers and become more defined and solidified. So I wouldn't say that the topic in the book really addresses the depression experience specifically, but it addresses certainly the photographs, because it's the photographs that are about that experiences when there was a moment of brightness. It would be really meaningful to me, and I would be moved to try to capture it.
Yeah, there is too like a quality even in the cover itself and in some of the photos where there is like a bit of light like refracting on things, or it's capturing a moment of light. And I think the poems all have that quality as well, where there's little moments, like little pockets of light. Even when it gets a little bit heavier in some of them, you still find like these little like pockets of just like I think you really do capture those little moments, and that's lovely.
Thank you.
I think we have a question from our in-person audience.
Hello. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed hearing you read the poems. You have a great way of reading them, and it made me wonder. It's going to be, I think, a complicated answer to the question, but when you're writing the poem, do you already hear how it's going to sound when you read it in the way that you did today, for example? Or is it on the page first? Do you have a certain phrases, and then when you see them, sounds of how you would say them, and not just pauses, but the way your voice goes up and down? What's the kind of way of those two? Do they develop together? Probably more likely, the relationship between the way that phrases get put on the page and the way you eventually will speak them out loud. So that's my question.
Thank you. I love this question. Poetry is for me a really auditory experience. So you're absolutely right when, or I should say correct. You're absolutely correct, because when I write, I am listening. I'm listening very hard. The first poem that I read, Rhythm, which I wrote back in 1982, as I said, the event, the volcano was in 80, and the poem didn't get written until 82. But I knew I was writing it for about a year. I knew the title of it, and I knew I was writing it, and I could hear it like a buzz. And it used to be, I don't have this experience as much anymore because now I have a writing discipline where I can sit often every day at the same time every day. And I sit and I listen, and it comes more as words. But in the early years, it used to be like a buzz that would slowly develop a rhythm. And when I could hear the rhythm in the poem, I would know that the poem was close, and I would sit and listen to it, and then the words would come. And the experience is a little bit different these days, but writing is for me very much an act of listening. And when I'm performing, I don't feel like I read the poetry. I really do feel that it's more of a performance. It's a very somatic experience for me, and that I am trying to recreate for you the experience of what it was like for me to hear it come into me. Thank you.
So I have another question from the Jack Pine staff. Was the process of conceptualizing, crafting, and sequencing Intimacies, a chapbook, different than that of your full-length collection? You might be sorry you read this, and how so? And how did you find the experiences, like in like similar ways or different ways?
Yeah, both books came out of what was the same process. Really excited that Belinda Becker's here because she and I met at the Sage Hill manuscript retreat. And I applied to go to the retreat with the proverbial shoebox full of poems, thinking that I was going to walk away with Sandra Ridley telling me just how much more, like what in here needs to be thrown away, and what else do I need to write if I'm going to create a manuscript. And that's not what she said. She said, "Oh, sweetie, you have more than a book here." So then it was a process of, oh, well, how do I find the manuscript in the shoebox? So Sandra and I worked for a week on just editing and polishing poems. And then I've been mentored by Betsy Warland. And Betsy said, take the entire shoebox and put it in chronological order, beginning to end, and either by what the poem is about or when it was written. And then I worked with another editor, Chelsea Como, once I got them in chronological order. And Chelsea went into that and said, these poems have a narrative arc to them. And they became the book, You Might Be Sorry You Read This, published by the University of Alberta Press in the Robert Crouch series this spring. And then there was still the poems from that. And Chelsea dove in again and said, these poems have integrity as a group. And then we had the idea, or I had the idea, to pair them with the photographs and see what Jack Pine thought of them.
Yeah, well, and we love them. So that's excellent. Oh, that's so cool.
And there are still poems left over.
Yeah.
So who
you
knows
just have
where
like a whole like wow.
there's a lot of poetry.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's amazing to hear too, and also very cool experience with Sage Hill as well. That's awesome. Is there a question from the online chat at all? If you'd like to ask them out loud, or it might be, or a little bit shy maybe. Or okay. Then my next question is, what is your work conveying about intimacy and space and or place? That's a bit of a broad question, but feel free to take that where you want as well.
Yeah, it's kind of hard, I think, for the poet sometimes to know what a collection conveys, because what it conveys is really dependent. You discover what it conveys on engagement with the reader, which is another very intimate experience. I don't know what it's like to have people read my poems about sex and friendship and love and the neighbor's cat, and respond to that. And so I'm waiting to see what the answers are to that. And I didn't know what it was going to be like to have You Might Be Sorry You Read This is a memoir, and it covers a lot of territory. As the title suggests, consider, if you need a trigger warning, consider yourself warned. So to find out how people respond to it and what they pull from it, that's really that process of engagement between poet and writer.
Yeah, no, that's so true. I think like a lot of meaning, is created not only by the writer, but then also through the engagement. And that's lovely. Yeah, thank you for that answer. Just a question for our audience.
I was quite caught off guard by the last line that you read, talking about dusty wind blowing, which for a prairie guy makes me think right away of the Great Depression. Was this a metaphor for your own Great Depression?
No, it wasn't. Like an interesting posing. No, it wasn't so much. It's really a poem of longing, and the person I had in mind at the time has a spirit name that speaks to wind, and I think I was meditating on that at the time. And having grown up in Manitoba and Saskatchewan, I'm really familiar with prairie winds and
So
what
you
they
have
can
a
be
right to
like.
talk about that.
And that the desire to feel that wind and to feel, and for me it was that particular dust in the air when harvesting is happening and the grain is being cut and the machines are in the fields. That dust above the grain fields blown against my face.
Nice.
Yeah.
Thank you. What a lovely question. What an intimate question.
Yeah, and I feel like definitely growing up in any of the prairie provinces, like it feels like wind and dust always like stick in the back of your mind, whether you want it to or not. And so maybe like it's cool, everything will come together like that. Another question from our audience is how do you prepare to give your performance? I believe that's referencing earlier when you mentioned the auditory and thinking of each performance. Like how do you prepare then for those performances?
I rehearse. I rehearse a lot. I want I want to find my mouth, the words to be in my mouth in a way. And actually, here's a confession. I forgot to wear my reading glasses at the podium. And I was too shy to stop. And my daughter, Adrian, is here helping me out, making sure I get places and don't get lost and, head in the correct direction and all of that. And I could have asked her to bring me my glasses, but I was too shy to do that and didn't want to interrupt the flow. So I could only see the page very vaguely while I was reading, but I had done it so many times over the past 2 days that it's in my mouth at the time.
Well, and it felt like very relaxed when you were giving it, so we wouldn't have even known that you forgot. That's so reading glasses. I know the feeling. But yeah, you have such a lovely way of reading, as already mentioned. So yeah,
it's just so very important. I also I used to write speeches.
Yes.
And it used to be so painful to listen to, because I wrote them, of course, for other people, for, bureaucrats, deputy ministers, assistant deputy ministers, also for ministers, but they weren't the political speeches. They were the speeches, when you're giving the building design accessibility award, that kind of speech. And it used to be so painful to listen to a deputy minister who had not read the speech, possibly had not even read the speech before he gave it. And so please, everyone, read your speeches and your poems aloud before you go anywhere.
Yeah, I definitely know what you mean, Ray. Sometimes when you are watching some speeches, like from like government type things, when you can kind of tell that they didn't write it themselves and that they didn't practice, and you're like, oh, yep. So I know that feeling. I had a question in mind too. Then my other question, based on what you were just saying, would be when readers are engaging with your work on the page and like reading it, do you feel almost like you would want them to read it aloud to themselves as well? Or do you think there already is that musicality to reading it, I think, internally as well? But that's just a question that popped into my mind now.
I haven't imagined that. What I have experienced from some readers that I didn't know that people would do is they underline a lot as they read, and they annotate the page. And I I brought together a circle of women in Vernon, where I now live, at the library. We had this little event and we brought together women so I could have the experience of what it was like for other women to have read the manuscript. And there was a woman who had elaborately decorated like a good third of the pages with drawings and comments that was completely unexpected for me. So I think there's more of a page experience. People interact with their books on the page, and it just delights me to know that they do that.
Well, I'm glad that there are writers out there that delights them, because I'm the type of person who I can't take things out from the library because I want to write in them always and add little notes. So I always have to hold myself back from doing that. We have another question. Yeah.
I'm just thinking about this as I'm talking, so it might just take me a minute to figure it out. But I was very interested in when you were describing, so you were writing poetry 40 years ago and it was coming to you like, I can't remember if you said humming or buzzing, but there was something auditory coming, and then it would be forming over time. This was my understanding, so you have to correct me if I'm wrong. And then you would eventually get to the point where you would probably have to write that down somehow.
Yeah, I would begin to detect a rhythm. I could tell the beat of the first few lines, but I wouldn't know what the words are that fell into that beat.
But would it be related to something sensory you experienced? Like you saw those beautiful northern lights, and then would there be a rhythm, and then you would connect those two? Or would it just be a rhythm searching for an image? Do you understand what I'm saying?
It wasn't in response. I would just hear that noise, and I would know that subconsciously I was writing a poem. And that when it got to the point where the noise had rhythm, that I had the first line, but I still didn't know what it was. And then I would sit and I would just meditate on the rhythm, and then the consonants would show up and I would know what the words
That is
were.
fascinating. So I was curious about that. And then you were speaking more, and then you said, well, now I have a writing practice where I write the same time every day. So I'm very interested to know the difference between those early, I don't know how you would describe that, but spontaneous or evolving rhythmic sense of your poetry versus a practice where you discipline, I'll just use that word to communicate with you, but I don't know if you think of it that way, but where you sit down and work.
I do think of it as a discipline. And for then it's just, you get, I like to write between 7 and 9 in the morning when right now I'm so busy producing things that I'm not writing. Getting a book together and gluing and organizing postage and all of that is, it uses a different part of the brain. So I'm not writing very much right now, but now it's more that I respond to deadlines very well. If someone says you have a deadline, in fact, one of the things that I did to recover from depression, I was active for a time in the Unitarian Universalist congregation in Canada. And because I'm a speechwriter and some congregations are lay-led, I would offer to write homilies for them. And so early in the depression, I signed up to write 5 or 6 homilies for one of the congregations in town because I needed those deadlines, and I would meet them because it's an obligation. And so you just need to write.
So the question I have is, now that we're talking and getting it more precision from what I'm thinking, do you still have those experiences of rhythm, or have you turned it into something you just sit and do that doesn't have that visitation of rhythm?
I don't have visitations anymore, and I miss them very much. That whole poetic emergency where you go, okay, it looks like this parking lot in front of the grocery store is going to be where I'm writing. And I used to keep paper in the glove box because you would get this poetic emergency. And I no longer get poetic emergencies. And it's possibly because I have this discipline where there are times where I don't have a deadline, but what I do instead is I write every day for,
So it just,
yeah.
I'll sit down right now, but just to say that's a really interesting use of that word emergency, because it's like something emerged, and you had to write it down.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If there's any other last questions, now is the time. Otherwise, I want to invite Michelle, if there's anything you want to close the evening with or anything.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Oh,
We have one more question.
I
Yes.
just have an observation, a little story to tell you. I once tried to read Ulysses by James Joyce, and I couldn't. It's impossible. And then I heard some read to me, and it was wonderful. And now I can listen to it on my iPhone. And then I wondered what's going on here. And I think what it is that humans are wired to take information in through the ear, through storytelling. Reading is a later human skill, and lots of people still can't read, but even those that can't read can listen. And I think hearing is a more powerful input into our minds and than reading.
Definitely.
I think so. And I too have tried to read Ulysses and found it nearly impossible, but I can really understand how hearing someone who's familiar with the text, who has the ability to bring the text to voice, would provide the entryway for those of us who are just trying to understand the text on the page. And I can link what you're saying. There's a comment here that says, I hear the poet's voice forever after hearing them read even a few lines of their work. And that's very much the case for me. I remember Anne Shumagalski reading back in the day when they would have readings in Regina that I would attend, and it completely changed my relationship to her poetry. It made it so much more accessible to me. And so I think that being able to hear the poet or even the author, I mean, I think that's why, book festivals and that are so attractive, because people get to hear the word come off the page and go into the body and come forward.
Well,
communicating is a whole body experience.
I would suggest you give Ulysses another go, because there's a wonderful reading of it. His estate would only allow one person to do the reading. It's the only one that's authorized, and it's a guy from Ireland who has all the accents and the little bits of Latin when necessary, and the English pronunciation when necessary. So it's a wonderful experience.
That sounds fantastic. I will take you up on that tip and
Excellent.
dip back into Ulysses.
One more just question here too.
How did the tones of your poetry change before and after your experiences with depression?
How did the tone
Yeah,
of the poetry change?
or even the beat of your poetry. Did you find something was different before, and did it evolve?
You know, I don't think it did. And it might be that the nature of like my depression was medically induced. I live with a chronic pain disease, and I got put on a pain medication that was psychoactive, but the doctor didn't recognize that that was a side effect of the pain medication. And so they began drugging me for the effects of the medication. And by the time I was on antipsychotics, I finally had an appointment with a psychiatrist who said, honey, there's nothing wrong with you that can't be fixed by getting you off that pain medication. But it took years, like, of shaving the drugs down so that they were less and less and less. So I think because of the nature of what I was going through, like there was something in my body that was playing with my cognitive ability that might have been different for someone whose depression comes from a different source. But I never really felt like I lost who I was. I just really couldn't function very effectively in the world because I had difficulty understanding things. And as I said, the day I drove into a rock was the day I said, this is getting really bad.
Right, yeah. Do have a
Thank you.
follow-up?
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So then now, yeah, that'll be all of our questions for this period. I'd like to just invite Michelle if there's anything you want to close off with before I do my closing section.
Well, the questions were such a delight. I feel quite empty,
Yeah.
which is a really which was a really good feeling. I'm so glad to have the books finally safely delivered here. And I'm just so grateful that so many people came.
Yeah, online people.
And I hope that it looks like we're going to be indulging in some treats and maybe some drinks here. So those of you at home, I hope you too will raise a glass and celebrate with us. Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Michelle. Like, it's so great to have your book to finally even hold it in my hands tonight too. And so, and thank you for coming out and traveling here and joining us for this lovely event. And also so great to hear all of your thoughts and kind of pick your brain a little bit further on the chapbook as well.
Oh, that is one thing. I really want to thank Jack Pine for bringing Adrian and I here,
Of course.
because with a number of the poems being written here on the prairies, to launch this book here on the prairies has meant the world to me. Thank you.
We're so glad. Thank you. Like, thank you for coming to Little Saskatoon. So thank you. Then with that, I'll just do a couple little closing things here. Again, thank you to Michelle and to both of our audiences here tonight. And a special thank you to Sask Arts for helping us make these beautiful chapbooks like Michelle's chapbook as well, and for making it possible to bring her here too and all of that. And thank you also to Louise Loft for the space and also for the delicious fruit and the beverages and for hosting us at this venue. And also a big thank you to 5x5 as well for their technological expertise and lending us their equipment, and for Logan as well. And we just hope that everyone had a great night and a great time. A recording of the event will also be available on our YouTube channel afterwards. afterwards for you to rewatch or share as well. And Intimacies is purchasable in person here tonight for our live audience, as well as online on our website for those of you tuning in now and potentially if you're watching the recording in the future. So have a great evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. All right.
Oh, great. Oh,